One preseason game down, 2 to go, and the New Orleans Saints still have a lot of unanswered questions. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat reporter for LouisianaSports.net, which should be premiering and debuting this week. You can also find me as the Saints analyst over on WWL TV. We appreciate you very much for being here for another episode as we get ready for Saints training camp day 15. I want to take a look at the unanswered questions that the New Orleans Saints still have that linger about. It's not bad to have unanswered questions, just one preseason game down. We just want to do a little bit of a progress check here. So we'll be taking a look at a couple of positional questions, including offensive tackle, including wide receiver, what that roster will look like. We'll take a look at the safety battle next to Tyrann Mathieu and how much Justin Simmons can potentially infuse into that if he were signed. We'll update you a little bit on that process as well. And we'll lead everything off taking a look at whether or not the New Orleans Saints offense is going to work in 2024, which is inarguably their biggest question of the season. We're going to break down how it should, my confidence around it, and why it might not. We'll get into all of that here as we get started with today's show. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs wants to help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Like I said, it's not a bad thing to still have questions that you need to answer right now as you've only gotten through one preseason game. You still have 2 more preseason games, another couple of weeks of practices leading up to all those, roster cuts at the end of that 3rd preseason game, a week off, and then you're into practices for your opening game against the Carolina Panthers if you're the New Orleans Saints. So it's not terrible to have some unanswered questions still at this point. I just want to kind of highlight what those big questions are and where kind of my confidence meter lands on each of the kind of elements in question. So let's start with one of the biggest questions the Saints will have to answer this season is, will their new offense work? And my confidence meter right now is at about 70 to 75%. Now, it could be higher, but I'll explain why it's not. The reason why it's as high as 70 to 75%, knowing that really like 99 is the absolute highest you can go on these things. You can't really ever say 100%, right? Like that would just be, you can go 99.9, but there's always that little sliver. And so the reason why I'm up so high here is because we've seen this offense work time and time and time again in today's NFL, the San Francisco 49ers, formerly the Denver Broncos, the Miami Dolphins, the Houston Texans, the Green Bay Packers. Like this offense works all around the NFL with very little exception. Now, that doesn't mean that the Saints can't all of a sudden be that exception. It doesn't mean that the Saints offense and their approach to this offensive scheme will work as well as the San Francisco 49ers offense or as a Miami Dolphins offense, but that's okay. You don't necessarily need it to. I mean, as poor as the offense was last year in terms of execution, scoring inconsistency, late kind of clicking, all those other things, they were still top 10 defense. So as you can see, you don't have to be perfect in the NFL to be a top, offense. You don't have to be perfect in the NFL to be a top offense in the league. So those are some of the reasons why I think this is probably going to work. If you take your offense that you were running last year and you add more motion to it and you add more play action to it and you don't do anything else, it's probably going to be better than it was last year. But instead, what you've done now is that you've taken it, you've improved the offense from a fundamental standpoint, and you've added motion, and you've added play action, and you've added the outside zone run, and all these other things. So you've effectively changed the offense as a whole. You've gone away from the Sean Payton-y offense that was originally and kind of put in place back in 2006, ran kind of a lesser version of that over the course of the past couple of years. And then now you said, okay, full departure away from that, going to this Shanahan offense, this wide zone scheme, this Kubiak offense that you have seen work time and time and time again all across the NFL. So it would be a massive exception in order for this offense not to work all of a sudden. Now, there are a couple things that can get in the way of it. We'll highlight those things here in just a sec. The other thing that I want to say too, though, in terms of why my confidence is so high on it, is that we're watching it in today's NFL. We're not watching it in 2006's NFL, right? So that's worth mentioning. And it also complements the strengths of the players on this offense. It gets Alvin Kamara out in space. It gets Taysom Hill in catch and run opportunities, Rashid, Shaheed in catch and run opportunities. It gets your tight ends in those catch and run opportunities, which you've already seen a guy like Dallin Holker be able to turn into 15-yard games in a game situation, for instance, right? We've seen it work for the quarterbacks and all that. I think that the mobile style of quarterback is probably going to be seen as somebody that would be a little bit more successful in this offense, but you don't necessarily have to be a mobile quarterback. You just have to be able to move. Derek Carr can do that. I think he'll be fine in this offense, even when asked to roll out, bootleg, all these other things. We just didn't get to see that in the preseason at all when they ran sort of this like 2% milk flavored version of their offense, which again, not an insult on what they did, a credit to what they were hiding. All right, let's look at the things that could get in the way. The first thing that's going to come to everyone's mind, and that you've probably already been shouting at me this entire segment, is the offensive line. That is probably the reason for, let me see, I'm down 30 to 25% here. That's probably the reason for about 20% of why I can't say, yes, this offense is going to work, because I just can't believe in this offensive line as of right now. And in particular, there are struggles on particular areas of the offensive line. We know what those are. But in any case, that has to be the thing that you look at and go, okay, that's the thing that could hold this team back. That's the thing that could stymie this offense from getting started, all those other things. Everything's going to come down to the offensive line. The offense will only be as successful as its protection. And that goes for the run game and the passing game. That very, very first snap, and even Dennis Allen highlighted this, that very, very first snap in the preseason game against the Arizona Cardinals, the 5-yard run by Alvin Kamara, very well executed. Looked great for the offensive line. He said that's what he expects everything to look like. So at least they've got teach tape, right? They did enough good things in that preseason game to be able to look back and say, okay, this is how we want to run this. Here is how we're successful, all those things. So I was all about that working, but then we just kind of saw a sinking ship for the offensive line in certain areas after that. We'll highlight one particular area a little bit later, but I'm not trying to beat the drum here. The last thing is execution, right? And so this comes out, this also includes the offensive line, but this includes Derek Carr. This includes, the wide receivers running the right routes and all these other things, right? Like that's, catching passes, like all those other things. It's just execution stuff. It's not that we've seen a lack of execution in training camp. It's not that I'm projecting a lack of execution. It's just that, like, for another 5% of doubt, 5 to 10% of doubt, it comes from the fact that you can install any system you want if you don't execute properly out on the field. And we saw the Saints not execute their previous offense properly for about 12 games last year. That's going to cause you some issues. So I think that that's the big thing that I would look at next, is just the execution. But am I super concerned about it? No, I'm just more concerned about the offensive line, so it makes the gap feel a little bit bigger than it really is. And look, you could say, but the scheme will help the offensive line, but that will only go so far. If you fail on first down, fail on second down, and all of a sudden you're in a third and long situation, the scheme can't help you. There's no play action. You can run all the motion you want. It doesn't matter. The defensive ends are coming after your quarterback. Can your offensive line keep that from happening? The Saints had one of the most proficient offensive lines and some of the best protection on first and second downs last year, but then they were 21st in the NFL when it came to DVOA, when it came to third and fourth downs. They were not trustworthy in those big situations. And some of that is Derek Carr holding the ball. Some of that is the offensive line getting beat off the ball, whatever. Like it's a shared responsibility. This is all a part of the execution stuff where you have to be able to convert some of those situations regardless of your scheme. All right, coming up next, let's take a look at the safety battle next to Tyrann Mathieu. Do we have a leader in that battle? I don't think so, but you would immediately get one if the Saints sign Justin Simmons. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is the same formula that will help you keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, exhaust kits, whatever it is that you're looking for, you're going to be able to find it over at eBay Motors. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, ebaymotors.com has you covered. With over 122 parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, that part is guaranteed to fit the first time for your ride or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, you're going to be able to make your car an MVP and start bringing home some huge wins over at ebaymotors.com. Keep your ride or die alive today at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And eBay Guaranteed Fit available only to U.S. customers. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints still need to answer the question about who will start at safety next to Tyrann Mathieu. They could get their answer immediately, though, if they sign Justin Simmons. Let's do a little bit of an update on where that all stands. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, don't forget to go and check out Locked On Fantasy Football so you can become the smartest fantasy football player in your league. Vinny and Michelle giving you everything that you need to be ready to go and win your fantasy football leagues this year. Go and check them out wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. I listen every day. You should be too. Every single day, fantasy football advice for you free. 30 minutes, excellent stuff. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So look, the New Orleans Saints can end this conversation very quickly by signing Justin Simmons, but of course, that's a two-way road, right? Saints brought in Justin Simmons on a visit. They had that visit. Sounds like, from everything that I've heard and everything that Dennis Allen has said publicly, all that the visit went well. Now, they're evaluating. Is this a move that the Saints really want to make? Is this a move that Justin Simmons really wants to make? So on and so forth. Well, Justin Simmons is now exploring more options. After the Saints became the first official visit that he took with a team, the Atlanta Falcons are now the second team. And so this is where things get a little bit complicated, because there are some things that make the Atlanta Falcons a better landing spot for Justin Simmons than New Orleans. None of them, however, are monetary probably. Here's what I mean by that. The Atlanta Falcons are desperate in a way that the New Orleans Saints are not. The Saints can roll into the regular season with Jonathan Abram starting, with Jordan Howden starting, and be perfectly happy with how things are going next to Tyrann Mathieu. They also have great secondary coaches, a fantastic defensive backs coach that works primarily with the safeties and Marcus Robertson, all that. They'll be fine at that position, whether it's Justin Simmons or it's not Justin Simmons. Would you rather it be Justin Simmons? Of course you would, because it's Justin Simmons. But are you okay with Jordan Howden, Jonathan Abram? 100%. You sure are, if you're the New Orleans Saints. So the Atlanta Falcons, not necessarily in that situation. They've had some injuries at the position, did not pay a lot of attention to their defensive side of the football, again, in free agency and in the draft. Haven't done a lot of things to help themselves over on the defensive side of the football. And now they desperately need a safety because they're dealing with injuries at the position. So now all of a sudden, a guy like Justin Simmons makes a ton of sense for them. And their desperation over the New Orleans Saints' desperation means they might be willing to fork up a little bit more cash than the New Orleans Saints are willing to fork up. And because of the fact that Atlanta has not paid much attention to its defense at all over the course of the offseason, they would be able to put Justin Simmons in just about any role that he wants as a safety, whether it's a deep safety, whether it's a box safety, whether it's a hybrid guy. They'd be able to give him whatever role he wants, and he'd be an immediate starter. Whereas in New Orleans, he would be an immediate starter, but he'd have to be a hybrid guy. He'd have to be a guy that can do a little bit of both. Drop back and play down in the box, maybe do a little bit more of one than the other. And that might not necessarily go Justin Simmons' way. So there are some things that are appealing from the Justin Simmons perspective about going to Atlanta, except for the fact that it is, of course, the Atlanta Falcons. Which, Justin, I get it. I understand. Not ideal. One of the big things, though, that separates New Orleans and Atlanta is the money with an asterisk, okay? I'm going to put a little asterisk on this. The New Orleans Saints have just over $13.1 million available in salary cap. The Atlanta Falcons have just over $3 million available. So the Saints right now sit with about $10 million more to spend than the Atlanta Falcons do. That can change very quickly, though. Do not forget that the Atlanta Falcons general manager, Terry Fontenot, went to the Mickey Loomis and Kai Harley University of New Orleans School of Loomisnomics and Salary Cap Ponzi schemery, I guess, is what some national folks, quote unquote, would call it. So he could easily restructure a contract here, restructure a contract there, whatever, make some money available to the team to be able to sign Justin Simmons. It can all work out. But for New Orleans, they're already sitting in this place where they can get it done and, have already had that conversation with Justin Simmons and everything like that. So we'll see where things go. My confidence meter on signing Justin Simmons has probably dropped from about 65% to 60%. I did expect it to take this long. I did not expect the signing of Justin Simmons to happen upon first visit or even really before the final preseason game is played. I could see Justin Simmons not wanting to sign anywhere and then run into the potential risk of having to play in the preseason and getting injured and all this other stuff, when what he's trying to do right now is get a contract for 2024 so he could probably hit the market again in 2025. At least that's what I imagine. I'm projecting a little bit there, speculating a little bit there, but that's my expectation. And so you don't want to sacrifice that opportunity for 2025 because you played a game in the preseason. So I'm not signing anywhere from Justin Simmons before the preseason. I'm really good. One of the top safeties in the league, the top safety on the free agency market. You need my services. I need a landing spot, but you don't need me for the preseason. You don't need me for the preseason. I will show up. I will learn your scheme. I'll be fine. I'm one of the best to do it right now. I will learn your scheme in 2 weeks and play week 1. All good. Ain't worried about a thing. Ain't worried about a thing. So that's the way that I would look at it if I were Justin Simmons. So again, my confidence meter there about 60%. We'll see where things go. Now, looking at what the Saints have in the building, which might end up being where the Saints have to go at this position, when you look at guys like Jonathan Abram as well as Jordan Howden, again, you're perfectly happy with these guys. Jordan Howden, a little bit more of a deep safety, but can play down in the box. Jonathan Abram, a little bit more of a box safety and can play the split safety role. Wouldn't necessarily want to have him be the single high safety in a cover 1 situation, but wouldn't mind him in a cover 3 situation in the middle of the field, or a cover 2, cover 4 situation, splitting some responsibilities in different areas of the field. Totally fine with that. My confidence meter in terms of if the Saints have to go with either either Jonathan Abram or Jordan Howden, because they can't land Justin Simmons, is probably 60% Jonathan Abram, 40% Jordan Howden, maybe even a little bit more than that. I might lean more 70% towards Jonathan Abram. And I think that the Saints kind of confirmed that a little bit in their preseason snap distribution. I keep wanting to say Justin Simmons. We saw Jonathan Abram get the start for the Saints defense, played only 10 snaps before he came out. And then we saw Jordan Howden get 28 snaps over the course of the game in total over on the defensive side. So he played a little bit more of a quote unquote reserve role or a second, third string role as opposed to a starting role. So that gave you a little bit of an indication of what the New Orleans Saints feel is their starting defense. And that did include Jonathan Abram being on the field early next to Tyrann Mathieu. So that's why I lean a little bit more towards Jonathan Abram than I do towards Jordan Howden. The thing that's really interesting, though, is that the Saints' unofficial depth chart, which they released before the preseason, actually has Jordan Howden above Jonathan Abram. But as we mentioned, that doesn't always mean something. Sometimes that's who's been around longer with the team or something like that. And Jonathan Abram was a free agency ad in the same year that Jordan Howden was a draft ad. You can kind of go either way with that. And then there was a time where Jonathan Abram wasn't on the active roster and Jordan Howden was already starting for the team, all these other things. So maybe that was just a little bit of that seniority stuff that they ended up playing into. But I think Jonathan Abram is probably going to be the starter next to Tyrann Mathieu. And then you can rotate Jordan Howden in for certain situations as well. It doesn't mean that you can't play both. You absolutely can. But all that comes to an end if Justin Simmons ends up being signed. And we'll see exactly what goes on after his visit with the Atlanta Falcons. All right, coming up next, we're going to answer 3 more questions that the Saints still have. Who will make the roster at wide receiver? We'll take a look at who's going to start at right tackle, which is obviously a big question. And is Kendre Miller in trouble? We're going to dive into all that as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs wants to help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster, and they want to do it for free, so it just doesn't get any better than LinkedIn. And it doesn't get any better than LinkedIn for a couple different reasons, not just because of that, but because of the fact that 70% of users that use LinkedIn don't even visit other job sites. LinkedIn is not just another job board. It is a destination for people looking to expand and continue their careers. And while your small business might be looking to hire and help them expand those careers, right? So this is exactly what it is that LinkedIn does. It's going to help you find a an active pool of dedicated users that are looking for jobs just like those that you have open, and they're going to do it all for free. And they'll also give you some tools to help you out. They even help you write job descriptions, all of this stuff. It's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn, and you should too. Here's how you do it. Head over to linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. We're taking a look at how many wide receivers the New Orleans Saints will keep, who will start at right tackle, and whether or not running back Kendre Miller is in some trouble here as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget, we are your team every day, so we'll be live after practice later on today, covering everything that happens in day 15 of New Orleans Saints practice. I can't believe we're already at day 15. We're already almost done here in Irvine before heading back to New Orleans, where there'll be a couple of open practices, all those other things. So really exciting stuff. All right, so who will make the roster at wide receiver? The thing that's really tricky here too is how many wide receivers will the New Orleans Saints keep? Do you end up keeping more because of the new kickoff rule, right? Because you need those types of bodies, guys that can be blockers and guys that can, run and have some speed, all those other things. Linebackers, corners, wide receivers become really, safeties, I guess I'll just say DBs as a whole, become really important in this new kickoff. And so could that end up impacting how many wide receivers the Saints keep? They typically keep 5. They have in some years kept 4 just for funsies. And then there have been other years where we've considered the idea that they might keep 6. And this is another one of those years. Here's what we know. All right, here are the locks. Chris Olave, Rashid, Shaheed. Those are your locks. Then there are other guys where my confidence meter is above 80% that they make the roster. That's Cedric Wilson Jr. and A.T. Perry, particularly A.T. Perry as of late, right? A.T. Perry turned it on in practice a few days ago, then had a little bit of a drop in the final practice before the preseason game, then had a fantastic preseason game and a fantastic practice the very next day to follow that up. If he follows that up again today with another solid practice, thumbs up, you're looking good. And of course, if he has a really good game in the preseason again this coming weekend against the San Francisco 49ers on Sunday, you're feeling even better about him. Cedric Wilson feels as sure a thing without being a sure thing from the very beginning. He had 2-year contract. He's the only free agent that the Saints brought in on a multi-year deal so far. We'll see what happens if they sign Justin Simmons and what that looks like. That always felt like that was going to be the case. The Saints need a big-bodied possession guy. They need a quintessential slot receiver. Cedric Wilson is both. So makes perfect sense. If you want your third wide receiver to be the guy that comes out on the field, in addition to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed to line up in the slot, Cedric Wilson's your choice. If you want to put Chris Olave or Rashid Shaheed in the slot, and so you want another outside receiver, A.T. Perry is your choice. It's great. It complements very, very well and allows you to be able to kind of maximize how you do it. But then what happens after that? Do you keep 1 more? Or do you keep 2 more? And of those 1 or 2 more, do you keep Mason Tipton? Do you keep Equinemius St. Brown? Do you keep Stanley Morgan Jr., who helps you over on special teams specifically? Do you keep Bub Means, right? So there's all of these guys. They just brought back Shaq Davis. Does he end up finding a spot? I'm sure I'm leaving somebody off the list. I'm not doing that on purpose, but like these are the guys that are most firmly entrenched in the conversation, particularly Mason Tipton, Stanley Morgan, and Bub Means. Equinemius St. Brown's been dealing with injuries and things like that. Bub Means has been dealing with injury as well and hasn't been out on the field, but has begun to progress back. Both of those wideouts, along with Rashid Shaheed, participating in individual drills on Monday. We'll see if they make any progress today. But Bub Means was a draft pick, so that maybe kind of colors the way that you think about it a little bit too. So I think those are the other ones. So for me, my confidence meter is like 80% above on guys when it comes to Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Perry, Cedric Wilson. And then I kind of throw Bub Means in there. If I'm being honest, they drafted him. Typically when the Saints draft a player, they try to make sure that they get to the roster. He doesn't feel like a guy that's going to get scooped up on waivers if he gets moved, if they try to get him over to the practice squad, just because he hasn't been able to participate in training camp so far. But let's see if he's able to close out the last 2/3 of the preseason strong, because if he does that, then bam, he's on the roster and he gets a little bit of that edge because of the fact that he's drafted. As of right now, if I had to add a 6th wide receiver, it would easily be Stanley Morgan Jr. Gives you a fresh gunner, gives you another guy that will be able to help you out when it comes to blocking, gives you another guy to be able to help out when it comes to attacking the middle of the field and operating out of the slot, and gives you another guy that's got the potential on other special teams duties as well. Just kind of checks a lot of different boxes for you. So that's what I'm looking at if it's 6. Bub Means, though, if it's 5. And then you look, Mason Tipton, if he was out there observing on Monday. We'll see if maybe he progresses a little bit today. But if he goes out there and has, balls out over the course of the last couple of preseason games or something like that, then obviously he'll be back to being a part of that conversation. Big question the New Orleans Saints have right now is who will start at right tackle? Will it be Trevor Penning? Will it be Ali Udoh? Will it be Landon Young? Or will it be other, right? Do the Saints go to the market, the free agency market, and try to bring somebody in? I don't think they go to the trade market because it just doesn't seem likely that you're going to be able to trade for a starting right tackle. Most teams aren't interested in trading their starting offensive lineman away. And so finding somebody of starter caliber at that position when offensive line play around the entire league is down, it feels like you're probably not going to find that guy. You're probably not going to find that trade partner. And so the Saints will have to figure this out with the guys that are either in the building, the guys that are currently free agents, or the guys that end up becoming free agents after the third preseason game, right? And hopefully you can grab somebody off of waivers in that situation. My confidence meter right now is still that it will be Trevor Penning at least week one. I think you got to continue to give him the opportunities. This is the first time he has ever played right tackle. That game against the Arizona Cardinals was the first time that he's ever played right tackle in a game situation. He's been practicing it, but then he got out there, and as we discussed in yesterday's episode, it felt like the technique just vanished, just kind of went away. And so does he improve upon that? You got to at least give him the opportunity to improve upon that this week up against the San Francisco 49ers. And then, as I've said before, you have to be ready with your pivot plan after that too. You got to be ready to quickly pivot away. Just got to. And so we'll see which way the Saints end up going with all that. But I think it'll be Penning. I think that they'll get this figured out enough to have him be an adequate starter. I don't think he's ever going to be a round one talent guy, or at least he's done enough now that no one's going to view him that way, is probably more fair to say. But I do think they have to at least give him the opportunity here over the course of this preseason game to say, okay, let me go out there and show you that I can play with the technique that you're instilling. But outside of that, Ali Udoh, getting him back to a natural position as tackle, or Landon Young, who I know you got a lot of value in Landon Young because of how much he can be James Hurst for you as a sixth offensive lineman. But at some point, you got to be ready to pivot away. And that might be sooner rather than later. So we'll see what happens there. Confidence meter on that one is like 40% Penning, but I'm fairly certain that they'll figure it out, right? Like that percentage should raise by the time that the preseason is over. And then finally, is Kendre Miller in trouble? My confidence meter on this one is easy. It's like 90% no, he's not in trouble. Does it stink that he hasn't been able to practice? Yes. Does it look bad that he's not been able to practice? Yes. Is he going to lose his roster spot? Probably not. The Saints have proven time and time again, even to a fault, that they're very, 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 very patient with draft picks. Now, he's a third round draft pick, not a first round draft pick. So if he doesn't pan out, he doesn't pan out, and that doesn't harm the team in any way. But look, we've seen his health improving. We've seen him progressing finally in the rehabilitation process, watched him kind of work off to the side with guys like Demario Davis and Juwan Johnson, which we hadn't seen before. It was a lot of like standing around and looking on. I'm sure he was working away from us and away from the practice facility, but him working out during practice is a level of progress that you can typically track. So we'll see where things go. I think that he makes the roster. I think Jordan Mims ends up being a practice squad guy, but it gets elevated, or ends up being a fourth running back that they end up keeping on the roster. One of the two. James Robinson, definitely one to watch as well. I don't think Kendre Miller's in trouble just yet. I don't think his job's in trouble. I think, though, that his outlook is in trouble. That I would definitely say. All right, y'all, we appreciate you very much for joining us for another episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget, we'll be live later on today post-practice, and you'll have a fresh episode again tomorrow morning as well. And don't forget to go and check out Locked On Pelicans and Locked On LSU to figure out what's going on around the rest of Locked On Louisiana. We appreciate you very much. As always, make us a part of your day, part of your routine for saying yes to me in the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure that you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.